Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror TV series named Masters of Horror Season 1 Part 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story, titled Incident on and Off a Mountain Road, begins on a deserted road at night. A woman named Ellen is driving alone listening to the radio. She fiddles with the radio to switch stations, and she doesn't see that there's another car haphazardly parked in the middle of the road. Ellen's car crashes into the vehicle, causing her to lose consciousness. A flashback reveals her first date with her husband. He was openly honest about his macho worldview and how he believed that strength is the only way to win. Ellen was very much attracted to his brazen personality. The two ended up going to his cabin that night and sleeping together. This was the beginning of their passionate and whirlwind romance that swept Ellen off her feet. He challenged her and inspired her to be better and stronger. And her husband liked that she was sweet and vulnerable like a little bird because he could protect her. In the aftermath of the crash, Ellen wakes up and woozily gets out of her car. She is mostly fine, but she's concerned about the person she hit. She shines a flashlight on the other vehicle, but discovers that there's no one inside. On the passenger seat is a blood-stained jacket. She follows the blood drops down the road and into the cliff by its side. In the darkness, a male figure slowly climbs up the cliff. Ellen thinks it's the driver of the car she hit, and she apologizes for causing the accident. But it turns out to be a hulking man with a pale, monstrous face. He is carrying the driver of the other vehicle. He sees Ellen and throws a knife at her in a split second. Ellen falls on the road, and the killer follows her there. She recovers quickly and dodges his lunges. She runs into the forest by the side of the road and hides in the cover of the trees. Another flashback starts. This time, Ellen and her husband were now a couple. They were jogging in the woods near his cabin, and he told her that in order to overwhelm her attacker, she has to do something unexpected and crazy. Ellen then playfully made her husband chase her until they collapsed on a hill, giggling. Her husband then pulled out a ring and proposed to her. At that point, she was still madly in love with this nasty man and could think of no better way to spend the rest of her life. So Ellen said yes. Back in the present, the killer has almost caught up to Ellen in the forest. She crawls through some underbrush with him, managing to get a hold of her legs. She forcefully kicks him and breaks free. She then grabs a pair of nail scissors and a wooden branch, quickly fashioning a trap for the killer. With all set, Ellen leaves the trap behind and runs away. When the killer reaches it, he grabs the branch, and it causes the nail scissors to hit him in the face. Ellen keeps on running, but soon finds herself with nowhere to go but a scary pit in the middle of the forest. Another flashback shows that Ellen's husband had trained her to fire a gun. At this time, her husband had fallen even deeper into the survivalist lifestyle, and he became paranoid. They barely went out to see other people anymore, except the other obsessed survivalists who feed her husband's delusions. She did not like how controlling he had been lately, and she tried to voice out that he's getting too hung up on the idea that they need to prepare for an earth-shattering crisis. This caused rifts in their marriage, and Ellen began to think something was wrong. Back to the present, Ellen lays another trap for the killer by cutting off strips from her skirt and tying large branches together. Then she waits behind a tree for the big rabbit to come. But instead of the killer coming forward, it's the other driver. Before Ellen could warn her, she slips down the pit, and her leg gets impaled on a tree branch. The killer pops up and triggers Ellen's trap, but it doesn't really deter him. He watches as the driver screams. The killer shushes her. Ellen continues to run deeper into the woods until she comes across a ridge. The killer's cabin is visible, as well as a dozen bodies he had strung up on wooden crosses. Ellen shrieks at the sight of the violated corpses and then loses consciousness. Another memory reveals that the couple's arguments had escalated. Her husband called her weak, and he goaded her into fighting him so she could show him how much she learned from him. But Ellen got fed up with his bullshit, so she told him that she was leaving him. Back to the present, Ellen wakes up inside the killer's house. Her hands are cuffed to a wooden pole, and the bodies of the killer's recent victims are piled around her. They all have no eyes. In the corner is an old man, who's also held prisoner by the killer. His hands are cuffed too. He starts babbling to Ellen about how different she seems to be from the other girls, who the killer had brought home. The old man appears to be a bit addled and speaks strangely. He tells Ellen the killer seems to really like her, and she could stay with him, and all three of them could be together. The killer goes downstairs and turns on the generator. Police sirens start blaring, and lights flash erratically around the room. He grabs the driver and heaves her screaming on a metal table. The killer uses a drill press to remove both of her eyes, effectively killing her. When the killer disappears again, the old man inexplicably begins singing. He encourages Ellen to sing with him, while she's frantically trying to free herself. Speaking in a riddle, he gives her the idea to get the piece of metal embedded on her shoulder. She's successful, and she uses the metal to unlock her handcuffs and get free. But the crazy old man immediately shouts and informs the killer that Ellen is escaping. It turns out he isn't actually cuffed to his chair, insinuating that he has a personal connection to the killer that made him last this long. The killer goes downstairs and attacks Ellen by choking her with a piece of wood. Ellen fights back and manages to climb the stairs to the living room. She sees the desiccated corpse of a baby in a stroller. The killer drops his knife on the floor, and Ellen stealthily yanks it. Using the martial arts skills her husband taught her, she fluidly hits him. She pushes him out of the window with a strong kick. But this isn't the end for the killer yet. He holds onto a blanket hanging out of the window. Ellen looks down at him with a smug expression on her face. She watches him for a few seconds, and then the fabric finally rips, causing him to fall to his death on the cliff below. Ellen silently puts on a pair of the killer's boots and also steals a gun from his drawer. She walks outside the house and sees her car parked nearby, probably taken there from the highway by the killer to cover his tracks. She opens the trunk, and inside lies her husband's dead body. The last flashback reveals the truth. One stormy night, her husband became insanely jealous and thought that she was cheating on his hormones. He violently forced himself on her. Afterward, her anger propelled her to choke him to death with his own belt. When the last breath left his body, she cried in grief. The reason she was on that road that night was that she planned on disposing of her husband's body somewhere and starting a new life. Too bad the killer had ruined her night. But this turn of events gave Ellen an even more foolproof idea of how to get rid of her husband's corpse. In the following, Ellen hauls his body back to the cellar and puts him on the table. She carefully presses the drill press to remove his eyes, just like how the killer did earlier. The old man watches everything, and this time, he really is tied with a rope. He realizes what she is doing and begrudgingly admires Ellen for her shrewdness. But the second part of her brilliant plan involves shooting the old man with the gun, so there would be no witnesses. She tells him that she's grateful for her husband's brutal lessons, for she wouldn't have survived the night without his wisdom. Then she shoots the old man. She shushes him just like the killer had shushed the driver that night. She strings up her husband's corpse on a wooden cross like the killer's other victims. In this way, she can disguise him as just another victim of the deranged killer in the woods. Even if the police find the corpse, they will just think that her husband fell victim to the killer. And on the off chance that the investigation leads to Ellen, she can just say that she and her husband were attacked by the killer, and she survived. The story ends with Ellen getting back in her car and driving down the highway again as the sun slowly rises. The second story, titled Sick Girl, begins with an insect being plucked by an unknown man. He starts experimenting on the bug and comments that it will be quite a surprise to the person he plans to give it to. Ida is an entomologist who is so passionate about her job that even her home has turned into an insect emporium. This has caused all her romantic prospects to be turned off. Case in point, her girlfriend just left a message on her voicemail saying that her bugs are just too much and she can't be in a relationship with her. Ida doesn't take the news well, and she cries herself to sleep that night. The next morning, she is still glum about the breakup while in her laboratory. Her coworker tries to cheer her up. He adds that girls will get understandably freaked out by her obsession with bugs, so she needs to tone it down. Ida is dismayed by this because she wants to meet someone who will actually love her for her zaniness. He even suggests that she ask out the quiet brown-haired girl who is always sketching in the lobby of their building. Meanwhile, a package containing the upgraded insect arrives at Ida's apartment. Ida and her coworker ride down the elevator together and see the brown-haired girl at her usual spot in the lobby. He urges her to ask her out, so Ida slowly approaches the girl. But it's actually the brown-haired girl who speaks up first. She doesn't make eye contact as she rapidly says that she has seen Ida in the lobby before. Speaking faster than an average human, she barely lets Ida speak, just breezes through introducing herself as Misty and asking out Ida on a coffee date. Ida is struck by shyness and stammers. To make matters worse, a spider starts climbing out of her lab coat pocket. She knows that girls find bugs creepy, so it lessens her self-confidence. Ida gives Misty an excuse and makes a hasty exit. But right before the elevator doors close, she gets her first glimpse of Misty's face. She is very pretty with porcelain skin and bright blue eyes. She gives Ida a shy smile, and it completely steals her heart. That night, Ida comes home to her apartment building and sees the landlady and her granddaughter. The granddaughter adores Ida and likes dressing up as a ladybug, since insects interest her too. But the landlady is snooty and disapproves of Ida keeping a bunch of insects as pets. Ida argues that pets are technically allowed in the building, and her insects are quieter and safer than dogs or goldfish. The granddaughter also pleads with the landlady to be more lenient, since she finds bugs to be wonderful creatures. She reluctantly lets Ida keep her pets as long as they do not make any trouble for the other tenants. When Ida finally reaches her own apartment, she is delighted to discover that an anonymous someone has sent her a package containing an insect. The package had come from Brazil. This is the same insect that was experimented on at the beginning of the film. She does not know exactly what the insect's species is, but this just makes Ida even more excited to have it. She names it Mick. The next day, she works up the courage to ask out Misty, who happily says yes. During lunch, Ida proudly tells her coworker that she and Misty will be having dinner together that night. She also mentions that Misty likes drawing pixie women, and her obsession with pixies makes her even more attractive to Ida. While eating in a Chinese restaurant, she notices a bug in her bowl. The rest of the diners quickly flee in disgust, but Ida and her coworker just discuss the bug's origins, theorizing that the bug probably came from China, which makes the restaurant's ingredients authentically Chinese too. Meanwhile, Mick escapes its container and wanders around Ida's apartment. Soon after, it burrows inside Ida's pillow. Ida picks one of her favorite restaurants for her date with Misty. They are both nervous around each other. Misty shyly says that she finds Ida attractive, and this breaks the ice between them. They keep glancing at each other with affection. Misty shares that she thought of watching a movie together after dinner, but nothing seemed interesting in theaters right now. So she took the liberty of renting a movie about pixies instead. She asks Ida if she has a DVD player they could use to watch the film. Ida is taken aback by this because she has a lot of insects in her place, and she doesn't want to scare Misty away on their first date. But in the end, Ida wants to spend time with Misty, so she agrees to take her to her place. They go to Ida's place and encounter the granddaughter in her ladybug costume. She introduces Misty to the child. The landlady calls for the granddaughter and curiously looks at Ida and Misty. Once inside her apartment, Ida seems to be even more nervous than before. She hurriedly blocks the way to her bedroom since all her pets are there, and she does not want Misty to see them. She awkwardly pours them a drink and pops the DVD into the player in the living room. They both have a good time and are now more relaxed, but they are interrupted by a call from Ida's coworker. She ducks into her bedroom to answer the call. He congratulates her for bagging Misty, but does agree that the pets in her bedroom may be a problem. Ida nervously returns to the living room and discovers that Misty has fallen asleep on her couch. She decides to get a blanket and a pillow from her bedroom, so Misty can sleep comfortably. However, she doesn't know that Mick is hiding inside her pillow. While arranging the pillow under Misty's head, she wakes up with a start. Misty is touched that Ida had tucked her in, and the two share their twisted tongues. After that, Misty settles her head back on the pillow. While Ida massages her neck, the proboscis of the insect slowly creeps out and pierces Misty's ear. She disregards this, and the two spend the night together. The next morning, Ida wakes up on the couch and finds Misty inside her bedroom, looking at one of her bugs inside a terrarium. Ida braces for Misty's fear and disgust, but to her surprise, Misty actually loves the bugs. She reveals that her father is an entomology professor who incidentally also taught Ida in college. Finally, Ida has found someone who isn't disgusted by her life's passion. Misty then notices the insect's empty container. Ida realizes that Mick has escaped. The two playfully look around her apartment together for Mick. But Ida's light push proves to be too much for Misty, and she almost falls to the ground. Misty also notices that some strange juice is coming from her ear. She feels sick and lightheaded, so Ida lets her sleep on her bed. Before closing her eyes, she looks at Ida with wonder in her eyes, not used to having a romantic partner who will stay with her through thick and thin. The next few days are blissful for Ida and Misty. Things are getting better and better between the two of them, and Ida is on cloud 9. However, Mick is still missing, and Ida shows her coworker Misty's sketch of what Mick looked like. The coworker is dumbfounded because no insect in a known record looks like the sketch. Frustrated, Ida just changes the topic to her and Misty's burgeoning romance. He advises her to take things slow and not to be too available to Misty so she can keep her coming back for more. Ida disagrees with this and says that she and Misty will go as fast or slow as they want. True enough, within a few days, Misty moves into her apartment. She's been feeling sick since she was bitten, but the joy of their new relationship has her glowing with happiness. But Misty doesn't tell Ida that she's been displaying some strange behavior. She keeps hearing scurrying noises, and she feels the uncontrollable urge to eat the worms that Ida feeds to her pets. Meanwhile, the landlady and her granddaughter see Mick scurrying along the hallway. She immediately identifies it as one of Ida's pets, so she knocks on Ida's door to tell her. The door was left ajar, and the landlady accidentally sees the two girls tongue massaging on the couch. This sight makes the landlady rush away. Later on, a dog goes missing in their building, presumably eaten by Mick. One day, Misty is cleaning up Ida's bedroom when she discovers that Mick has made a nest inside the pillow. She is about to call her about her discovery, but something seems to possess her. Misty's ear is now swollen and infected, with more juices oozing out of it. Her eyes look glazed as she lies on the bed with her infected ear close to Mick's nest. The proboscis comes out again and pierces Misty while she's sleeping. Ida receives a letter from the mysterious man who mailed her Mick. The letter warns her that Mick is a dangerous species of insect that eats mammals. The sender seems familiar to her, but she couldn't remember where she knew him. Despite how strange the letter is, she begins to believe it because a dog had gone missing after Mick arrived. Mick was also not an identified species, and it doesn't have genitals as well. She is still reading the letter as she walks into her apartment building. She realizes that the handwriting in the letter looks similar to her former professor and Misty's father's handwriting. Misty greets her with a kiss, which is witnessed by the landlady and her granddaughter. The landlady is apoplectic with anger, and Misty, who looks pale and unwell, uncharacteristically starts mocking the landlady. Ida tries to be diplomatic, but the landlady is angry with her as well. She is sickened by their deviancy and orders Ida to move out of her apartment within the week. This upsets Ida. She gets angry at Misty for laughing, while the landlady is insulting them. Misty blows up at her and screams that she's stuck at home cleaning and doing laundry, and Ida is acting immaturely. Misty loses consciousness after her tirade, and she collapses. When she wakes up, she tells Ida that she had the strangest dream. In her dream, she was a fairy, and a large insect got on top of her and pierced her navel. The insect then pumped its hormone juices into her body. Misty thinks that her dream had something to do with the fact that her father, the professor, had never accepted her being a lesbian. Ida then gets a call from her coworker saying that the anonymous sender had written a letter again. She immediately goes to the lab. This time, the anonymous man sent illustrations of Mick, along with information about its habit of feeding on birds and other mammals. What's more, it has the ability to impregnate other animals with its babies, too. Ida quickly realizes that Mick had bitten Misty and infected her, which is why she has been behaving strangely. Misty puts the pillow containing Mick between her legs, and the insect inseminates her. Afterward, she ventures into the hallway and strikes up a conversation with the landlady. The landlady is repulsed by her and calls her a pervert. Misty suddenly transforms into a half-human, half-insect hybrid and throws the landlady from the second floor. Ida arrives home and sees the landlady's dead body being carried out. Misty is acting happy about the landlady's death, and Ida quickly gets her back to their apartment. Deeply concerned, she calls her coworker to her apartment. She confronts Misty and tells her that she believes it was the professor who had sent the insect. Misty already knows this. It turns out her father found out that she had a crush on Ida ever since she saw her in one of her father's classes. Repulsed by his daughter's unconventional desire, the professor sent Mick to Ida, hoping that the insect would infect her and keep her away from Misty. The coworker arrives at the apartment, but is killed by Misty, who has transformed once again into an insect-like monster. Mick climbs up Ida's body and inserts its proboscis into her ear, infecting her like it infected Misty. The story ends with both women getting pregnant with Mick's babies. They are delirious with happiness and are lounging on their couch wearing identical clothes. As they gleefully chatter about their impending delivery dates, Mick is inseminating them through their ears. The third story, titled Heckle's Tale, begins in the late 19th century. A gentleman on horseback arrives at an old woman's cottage in the middle of the night. Ominously, there are several graves with wooden crosses on the front lawn. The gentleman slowly knocks, and the old woman tells him to come in. The man quickly gets to the point. He wants her to revive his dead wife from the dead. She has recently died, and the man is bereft with grief. He hears that she is the necromancer who can bring back the dead, so he pleads for her to help him. But the old woman refuses him, citing that bringing back the dead always has a heavy price. Her deeds of resurrection have taken too much from her too, and she remarks she's all used up. Still, the gentleman insists she can do this extraordinary feat. After a pause, the old woman issues a challenge for him. She will tell him a story, and if after hearing it he still wants to bring back his wife, then she will do as he wishes. The gentleman accepts, and he sits on a chair by the fireplace. The necromancer begins the tale of Heckle, who was an ambitious and overconfident medical student 5 decades ago. Heckle's professor at the medical school is teaching the class that God blesses medicine and all those who pursue it. Heckle, ever the contrarian, challenges his professor and criticizes him for bringing religion into their studies. He doesn't believe in God or faith. Instead, he worships solid medical evidence and advancement. Heckle cites Frankenstein's experiments as proof that man can be God. The professor scoffs at his example and says that resurrection is not possible because it is God alone who can grant bodies the spark of life. With a glint in his eye, Heckle proudly proclaims that he can bring the dead back to life, and he will show the professor how. That night, the classmates and professor watch as he reveals a dead, naked woman lying on a table. He explains that she recently died of consumption. The professor criticizes him for procuring the body through nefarious means, but Heckle isn't exactly concerned with ethics. He adds that Heckle's father is a pious man, and he wouldn't approve of Heckle's methods. His father is a sore point for Heckle, and he raises his voice as he argues that his father wants the cold, hard truth. Heckle then continues his presentation, saying that he closely follows Frankenstein's scientific process and he will be using an electric current to revive the dead woman. Without further ado, he turns on his machine and electrocutes the woman. For a brief moment, her eyes flash open, but the current is too much and it fries the woman's body like bacon. The professor then smugly admonishes him for daring to defy God. After everyone else has left Heckle's lab, an undertaker visits him. He brings with him a fresh corpse of a man who has died of pneumonia. This undertaker has long been supplying Heckle with corpses for his experiments. However, Heckle is too dejected from his failures to buy a corpse that night. The undertaker suggests he meet with a necromancer named Montesquino, whom he saw perform an impossible feat just days before. Heckle dismisses his suggestion as a mere myth, but the undertaker tells him there is a thin line between science and magic. He invites Heckle to see Montesquino's work for himself. Intrigued, Heckle attends one of Montesquino's demonstrations. Montesquino is a squat man with long hair and a nasty mustache. He claims that he's granted the powers to resurrect the dead, but for every person he brings back, 1 year of his life is deducted. Montesquino starts his show by holding up a dead dog for the audience to see. He places the animal back into a basket and closes the cover. Montesquino utters a few words in Latin and suddenly, the dog comes back to life. But he bashes the damn dog's head with his cane and fatally shoots it with a gun. He explains to Heckle that resurrecting an animal is much simpler than resurrecting a human because a person's soul is complex. Right at that time, a husband and wife step forward and ask Montesquino to resurrect their dead daughter claimed by diphtheria. The price for her life is $100, a price too steep for the impoverished couple. The wife tries to appeal to Montesquino's good heart, so he will bring their daughter back for free, but the necromancer is adamant that he get paid. That night, Heckle visits Montesquino again in his camp within the forest. He asks the necromancer to teach him his ways. But of course, Montesquino's precious knowledge is his bread and butter, so he isn't willing to share it with others. Heckle then accuses him of pretending he can resurrect beings and scamming grief-stricken people. Montesquino takes offense and angrily storms out. The next day, Heckle receives a letter informing him that his father's illness has worsened. He goes inside the forest to have a quiet moment eating bread under the tree. Suddenly, some grayish liquid lands on top of his bread. He looks up and sees a dead man hanging from a rope, a placard proclaiming that he's a pedophile nailed to his body. Disgusted, Heckle resumes his journey. Night falls, and he is forced to take shelter inside a cave. There he meets a man named Walter, who offers him a night in his house. Pride makes Heckle refuse his offer. But when Walter tells him the cave is next to a necropolis, Heckle hesitantly accepts. He looks out the cave, and sure enough, there are lots of tombstones spreading out in the graveyard next door. Walter leads Heckle inside his humble home. They are greeted by Walter's young and beautiful wife, Elise. Heckle's gaze lingers on Elise for a moment too long, and Walter notices his hormone thoughts. Elise herself seems to be intrigued by the young medical student. They sit down for dinner, and Heckle still can't tear his horny eyes away from Elise. Walter bluntly tells Heckle that he must be wondering why such a beautiful girl is married to a poor old man like him. He adds that love is always complicated and does not always run like how we expect it. While pouring more wine into Heckle's glass, Elise asks him if he has ever been in love. Heckle replies he had never experienced true love. Walter then asks him a bold question about whether he had experienced physical love. Heckle is taken aback by the forwardness of the old man and refuses to answer it. Elise leads him down a hallway into the spare bedroom where he will stay the night. Heckle can't help but inch his face closer to her. For a moment it seems like Elise is drawn to him as well, but she quickly composes herself and leaves the room. Heckle settles down on the bed, and through a crack in the door, he sees Elise pleasuring herself by the window. She turns around and sees him watching. Instead of being embarrassed, Elise just continues her ministrations. Heckle eventually falls asleep. He wakes up in the middle of the night. This time, he sees Walter meeting with Montesquino. Then sometime later, Elise walks by nursing an infant who is shrieking loudly. She puts down the annoying baby and then angrily whispers to Walter that she cannot wait anymore because she has been waiting for a whole year already. Elise walks out of the door. Heckle gets out of the bed and joins Walter at the table. The old man reveals that because of his age, he's never able to perform his marital duties in bed. Heckle points out that they now have a baby, but Walter replies the father of the baby is Elise's dead husband, whom she loves dearly. When he married her, he tried his best to satisfy her by selling all his possessions to pay Montesquino to resurrect Elise's dead husband. Heckle admonishes him for believing Montesquino's lies, but Walter assures him the necromancer's powers are true. A second later, they heard Elise's screams. Heckle rushes out of the house with Walter's shotgun. Walter chases him and tries to stop him. The same dog that Montesquino resurrected a day before emerges from the edge of the forest and barks at the two men. Heckle bashes it on the head with a rock, but it just keeps coming back to life. Heckle then follows Elise's cries to the necropolis. Walter stays behind at the gate, and Heckle calls him a fool for being deluded. Heckle finds Montesquino smoking near the tomb. He berates him for taking advantage of Elise's grief and Walter's foolish desire to please her. Montesquino is unperturbed by Heckle's accusations, and he shows the young man that he didn't do anything to Elise, but actually makes her happy instead. Inside the tomb is a naked Elise, gyrating on top of her dead husband, who has been reanimated but still looks like a corpse. Around her are other reanimated corpses. Walter appears and Heckle screams at him for letting this happen. With tears in his eyes, Walter soberly explains that no living person can ever satisfy Elise, so he just lets her sleep with her dead husband to make her happy. The other corpses start joining Elise and her dead husband. Desperate now, Heckle points the shotgun at Montesquino to force him to stop whatever magic is reanimating the corpses. Walter tries to convince Elise to stop, but the other corpses begin tearing him apart and feasting on his organs. Montesquino flees the necropolis and Heckle shoots him. Before he dies, Heckle forces him to say the incantation that will unravel the spell. Heckle passes out in the necropolis. He wakes up the next morning only to find Walter's dead body. The corpses are now back in their graves. He returns to the house and sees Elise sitting on a rocking chair, nursing her fat baby again. Apparently, she's unbothered by her new husband's death, and even alludes that she chose him because he's old and wouldn't get her pregnant. Elise says that her baby looks just like her dead husband. She stands up from her chair and proudly shows the baby's face to him for the first time. To his horror, the baby is actually a zombie, born out of the unholy marital relations between Elise and her resurrected husband. The baby's face is mottled, gray, and monstrous. She presses the baby's face to Heckle's neck and lets the baby rip his throat out with its teeth. That night, Elise sleeps with a zombified Heckle, while the reanimated corpses, including Walter and Montesquino, just watch like a peeping Tom. Back to the present, the old woman ends her story there. The gentleman is disgusted by her tale, and he realizes the old woman is actually Elise. Her house is the same house that she and Walter lived in beside the necropolis. Her dead husband suddenly appears, and she kisses his lips. She tells the gentleman that Montesquino has taught her the dark arts. This enables her to keep resurrecting corpses at night. A second later, the reanimated Walter walks in, holding her zombie baby. The zombie Heckle appears too. Horrified, the gentleman runs out of the house for his shitty life. The story ends with Elise bottle-feeding her annoying baby, and her zombie men gathering around her like she's the queen of the dead. The fourth story, titled Imprint, begins with an American journalist, Chris, visiting a remote island in Japan. He rides a boat in the middle of the night with some Japanese laborers to get to the island. His fellow passengers tease him about liking Japanese women, but Chris just stays silent. Their boat bumps into a floating corpse of a pregnant woman. The man rowing comments that the woman is just the latest dead body from the island. This particular island is famous for being a den of prostitutes and their masters. The laborers who came with Chris all eagerly inspect the available women, while he carefully checks each cage for the one woman he is looking for. Sadly, she is not there. Other women try to get his hormone attention, but Chris remains stoic. He does notice one prostitute who is shrouded in shadows. A disabled touter approaches Chris and urges him to pick a girl already. He then explains that he is looking for a girl named Komomo, but the touter doesn't recall a prostitute on the island with that name. Dismayed, Chris says he'll be leaving, but the touter informs him that no boat will be returning to the mainland until morning. Since he has nowhere else to go, the touter convinces him to stay in one of his rooms and be in the company of a prostitute. His face still unreadable, Chris tells the touter that he wants the girl in the shadows. Chris is taken to his lodgings and served with the wine. He reminisces about his lost love, Komomo. She was a beautiful Japanese girl who fell in love with Chris. He loved her too, but he had to leave her behind when he came home to America. After he left, Komomo was sold into prostitution, and Chris has spent years trying to find her. A while later, the girl Chris selected softly pads into the room. For the first time, he can finally see her face. It dawns on him why she is kept hidden in the back of the room. The entire right side of her face is marred with a birth defect. She comes closer to him and shares that lost souls reach out to touch her. She then shrieks and says that the souls are there with them in the room. Chris looks behind him but sees nothing. The disfigured girl calms down and shares that she has been cursed since birth, with a connection to the dead. He asks her about his lover, Komomo, and she in turn asks him what he plans to do with her. With his lips loosened by the wine, Chris divulges that he wants to take Komomo back to America and give her a better life. The disfigured girl's face saddens, and she begins to tell him about the tragic tale of Komomo. It turns out she had died 6 months after coming to the brothel. She hung herself because her heart was broken after her lover didn't come for her. Chris doesn't take the news well, and he curses himself for taking too long to return to his love. He is about to leave when the disfigured girl begs him not to for his safety, since the island is not in the human realm but is filled with demons. This alludes to the fact that Chris, knowingly or unknowingly, traps himself in a room where he has to face his own demons. The disfigured girl tries to calm him down and leads him back to the room. Chris drunkenly confesses that Komomo had reminded him of his dead sister. Then he lies down on a mat while the disfigured girl takes care of him. A few hours later, Chris wakes up with the disfigured girl fanning him. He asks her why she's still awake, and she answers that it's a disgrace in her trade if she sleeps while a client is in the same room. Suddenly, he sees a ghost creeping up behind her. Then it disappears instantly. Chris rationalizes that the wine is playing tricks on his mind. The disfigured girl offers herself to Chris, but he refuses. He explains that he does find her beautiful, but he's just not in the right frame of mind to sleep with anyone. Mollified, the disfigured girl urges him to sleep. He then asks her to tell him a bedtime horror story from Daniel CC Movie Channel. She begins to tell him about her past. The disfigured girl was born in a poor village, nestled deep in the mountains. Her mother was a midwife, and her father was sickly. She was born with her deformity, and this caused her to be ostracized in the village. All alone while growing up, she befriended a Buddhist monk who told her about the perils of hell for sinners. Her father eventually succumbed to his illness, and her mother sold her into the brothel. Years later, she met Komomo in the brothel. The disfigured girl was not able to attract clients like the other prostitutes, so the madam didn't feed her until she got one. Komomo was the only one on the island who showed her kindness, so the two became friends. She told the disfigured girl about her American lover and how he will someday take her away from this hellish place. The other girls mocked Komomo for being idealistic and believing she was a princess, when the truth was that her biological family killed themselves and she was sold by her foster parents. The disfigured girl defended Komomo and threatened the mean prostitutes. Komomo quickly became popular among the brothel's patrons. The other prostitutes resented her for this. One day, the madam's valuable jade ring disappeared. The girls framed Komomo by leaving her hairpin at the scene of the crime. The madam ordered her to be tortured, and Komomo suffered greatly. A torturer burned her underarms and stuck pins into her gums and under her fingernails. Komomo was then hung upside down. Not able to withstand the pain anymore, Komomo confessed to stealing the ring, but did not know where it was. So the torture continued, but they could never find the ring. Komomo collapsed, and she eventually hung herself. In the present, Chris does not accept the disfigured girl's story. He begs her to tell him the truth. She tells him that sometimes it's better to believe a lie. But Chris is insistent that he gets to know what really happened. So the disfigured girl tells him the details she omitted in the first version. It turns out that it's her who had stolen the madam's jade ring, and Komomo saw her coming out of the madam's room, so she framed Komomo for the crime. After Komomo's torture started, she went to the room where Komomo was kept and gave her water. But then she tightened the noose around Komomo's neck and killed her. The disfigured girl explains that she couldn't stand the kindness in Komomo's heart. She believed that kind of purity had no place on this hell-like island, and that killing Komomo would send her to heaven where she would suffer no more. Still, Chris is adamant that the disfigured girl is hiding something. Right then, a raspy voice begins to speak and urges the disfigured girl to tell him the truth. She twists and shakes, then finally says that she tells him her true story. This time, her mother and father were dirt-poor beggars. Her mother was an abortionist, and her father was a mean drunk who beat her mother very often. When she was born, she was dumped in the river in front of their house. But she lasted 2 days, and her mother decided to let her live. While growing up, she watched many women come to their hut to get their unborn fetuses aborted by her mother. She was always tasked to dump the fetus bodies to the river, and she began to believe that she'd go to hell for aiding her mother in committing a sin. The Buddhist monk who befriended her eventually molested her and scared her into obeying him by threatening that she would go to hell. Her alcoholic father abused her too. One night, she came up behind her father and hit him with a rock until he was dead. She then dumped his body in the river, and from that time on, a monstrous hand suddenly emerged from the side of her head. In the present, the monstrous hand is also emerging from the disfigured girl's head. On the palm of the hand is a pair of eyes and a set of teeth. She calls the monstrous hand her twin sister. It's revealed that her mother and father were siblings, and when the people in their village found out about their incestuous relationship, they were forced to leave town and became beggars later. What's more, only her mother knew about her monstrous hand. From then on, the hand whispered evil thoughts and manipulated her to do bad things. The hand had also pushed her to kill their father and steal the madam's ring in the brothel. Therefore, the disfigured girl believed that this is why she was damned to spend eternity in hell. Right then, the monstrous hand begins to speak in Komomo's voice and taunts Chris. She even knows he actually killed his sister in America, the darkest secret of his own. Apparently, the role of the disfigured girl and her monstrous hand in the story is mainly to remind Chris of his committed sins, which might have been hidden by himself intentionally. This finally drives him crazy, so he grabs his pistol and shoots the disfigured girl, but she just cackles and says that he cannot kill them. He shoots her in the head, and suddenly, the disfigured girl transforms into Komomo. She pulls out the brain matter gushing out of her bullet hole and tells Chris that she waited for him. She then collapses and dies. Chris is later put in prison for the disfigured girl's death. The guards remark that they will make his life a living hell. He grabs the measly prison ration and starts eating. But when he is about to drink from a pail, he sees that there is an aborted fetus inside. He cradles the pail and sings a lullaby to it. The story ends with his sister's ghost and Komomo keeping Chris company in his cell, ensuring that he is haunted by his sins forever in his living hell. The fifth story, titled Dreams in the Witch House, begins with a graduate student, Walter, searching for a quiet place to work on his thesis. He knocked on the door of an old house. Although the landlord demanded a lot and didn't like students, Walter still rented a room because it was cheap enough. He tolerated the hollow drawers and settled in. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard banging noises and chanting coming from downstairs. Although Walter found it strange, he didn't let his curiosity get the best of him. One day, while studying science, Walter suddenly heard a noise coming from behind the wall. However, after checking it out, he couldn't find anything wrong. Just as he was about to relax, he was shocked to discover that the wall behind him was similar to the alternate space he was studying. As he stared in disbelief, a scream came from the neighboring room. It turned out that the single-woman tenant next door, Frances, had encountered a rat. Seeing the situation, Walter quickly chased the rat away. At Frances's request, Walter approached the landlord, hoping he would deal with the rat problem. However, the landlord couldn't be bothered and even asked Frances to be quieter. Walter suggested buying some rat poison, but the landlord refused, fearing someone might accidentally consume it. Reluctantly, the landlord handed Walter a hammer after repeated requests. An old tenant from the other room asked Walter if the rat in Frances's room had a human face. This puzzled Walter. Returning to his room, Walter dismantled the useless drawer, using the removed wooden panels to block the rat hole, providing a temporary solution for Frances. Afterward, they introduced themselves to each other. Francis's baby son, Danny, seemed to like Walter a lot. Late at night, a strange light suddenly appeared in the corner of Walter's room. Following that, a rat with a human face climbed onto Walter. It told him that it had come for him. This scared Walter a lot, and the rat quickly fled the scene. It turned out that the rat had crawled out of a hole in the floor. Francis heard his cries and hurried over to ask what had happened. At Francis's invitation, Walter went to her room. While chatting, Walter passionately shared his knowledge in alternate dimensions. Upon learning that Francis couldn't afford her rent and had to move out, Walter gave her some dollars, hoping she could overcome this difficult time and find a job soon. Although not wealthy, Walter had earned some money by grading papers for his professor. Once, while doing research, the sound of banging and chanting came from downstairs again. Unable to bear it any longer, Walter went to the old man's room. The noise was indeed coming from the old man, who mentioned the human-faced rat again. However, Walter thought it was his hallucination. The old man then made some strange remarks, saying that an evil witch is coming for you. The old man had lived here for a long time, and like Walter, had been young when he moved in the same room in the past and experienced similar events. Back then, the witch had controlled the old man and made him do terrible things. To prevent Walter from making the same mistakes, the old man intended to give him an amulet for protection. However, Walter refused to take it, thinking that he could handle it with his ghost-proof muscles. One day, Francis got an opportunity for a job interview and asked Walter to take care of Danny for an hour or two. After she left, Walter confessed his feelings to the baby, revealing that he liked Francis. While working, Walter suddenly felt exhausted and fell asleep. During his slumber, a witch dressed in black entered his room. Transforming into Francis's appearance, she quickly lured Walter into bed. Before they could get intimate, the witch scratched Walter and revealed her true form. Walter suddenly woke up, realizing that everything he had seen was a dream. Strangely, he had been in Francis's room but somehow ended up back in his own. Francis just arrived home and couldn't understand why her baby had left unattended. Unable to explain himself, Walter wondered if he had been sleepwalking, but the scratch wound on his back was real. To prove his suspicion, Walter sprinkled flour on the floor so any passing footsteps would leave a trace. Shortly after falling asleep, he heard strange noises, and a mark appeared on the flour, extending under the bed. Just as Walter was about to investigate, a hand grabbed him and transported him to another dimension, where Walter encountered the witch and the rat. Although he wanted to resist, he couldn't control his body. After the rat bit through Walter's skin, it used his blood to make a mark. Walter woke up once again, finding himself in the school library, but the wound on his hand was real. He then noticed a book in front of him. The book described an alternate dimension and a certain sacrificial ritual. It resembled the Book of Death shown in The Evil Dead. The librarian was shocked to see the book, as it was supposed to be hidden in a secret chamber. Seeing the wound on Walter's hand, the librarian called the security guard. With no other choice, Walter had to flee. He remembered the book mentioning that the sacrifice required a baby, so he urged Francis to move out immediately. Although Walter explained everything, Francis didn't believe him and even thought he had gone mad, driving him out of the room. Late at night, the old man knocked on Walter's door. After everything that had happened, Walter finally believed in the old man's words. He thought that the witch had found the intersection of the two dimensions, allowing her to travel freely between them. If they could exploit this, maybe they could defeat the witch. However, the old man told Walter that he had been marked by the witch and now belonged to her, so all he could do was run away. Walter didn't want to flee. If he did, the witch would go after Danny, and Francis would be involved as well. So Walter decided he had to protect them. The old man revealed that he had also tried to stop the witch before, but had failed. Under the witch's control, he had killed a child and couldn't forgive himself even to this day. Back then, he was like Walter. No one believed his bullshit. So now all he could do was give Walter a protective amulet. After the old man left, Walter started smashing the wall with a hammer. Hearing the noise, the landlord rushed over, trying to stop Walter, but was driven away. In the hole Walter had made, he discovered the remains of many infants. It seemed that many babies had already fallen victim. To put an end to this, Walter followed a secret passage to another room, where he found Danny captured by the witch. The witch used her magic to control Walter once more, intending to make him end Danny's life with his own hands. In a desperate moment, Walter used the force of the witch's spell to aim the knife at her. The witch had no choice but to stop her magic. He then blinded her while she was casting another spell. Although injured, Walter managed to kill the witch with the knife, successfully saving Danny. Upon returning to the room, an exhausted Walter placed Danny on the bed and started to rest. Unexpectedly, the human-faced rat attacked Danny. Hearing her baby's cry, Frances rushed over, called the landlord and the police, and they all barged into Walter's room. Everyone was stunned by the sight of the deceased baby and a blood-covered Walter. Without a doubt, Walter became the prime suspect in Danny's murder. Due to his account of the events, people suspect that Walter had a mental illness. The doctor initially thought he was faking it, but changed his mind after further examination. At that moment, a police officer brought some investigation materials. The police found a large number of infant remains in the walls of Walter's room, the oldest of which was over 300 years old. The traces in the room and the wounds on Danny's body matched Walter's description. This meant that Walter was telling the truth, but no one would believe such a story. After the witch's death, the old man finally found peace. He packed up his crucifix and chose to end his life, freeing himself from the guilt he had carried. Later, a caretaker opened the door and was shocked to find Walter lying in a pool of blood. It turned out that Walter had been attacked by the human-faced rat, which had managed to escape. This indicates that the horror from the alternate dimension was far from over. The sixth story, titled Dance of the Dead, begins in a post-apocalyptic society caused by war, where chaos filled everywhere. A young girl named Peggy lived with her mother ever since her sister's disappearance. Although her father had passed away early, he left behind a substantial amount of money for his wife and daughter. It was this money that had kept them alive until now. Her mother had operated a shop in a chaotic town. Gangsters Jack and Nerd robbed an elderly couple on the street, but they didn't steal their belongings. They took their blood. After learning that the old lady was quite aged, Jack immediately drew her blood, while Nerd taught the old man a lesson. This place was infamous for its chaos, and no matter what happened, no one intervened. It was a haven for criminals. After watching the news, Peggy's mother said that places like their town should be bombed. She warned Peggy about the dangers outside and advised her not to wander around. Soon after, the mother's friend came to the shop, hoping for some food. However, the mother turned her away because the friend had been infected by poisonous gas, causing large sores on her body. Her presence would affect the customer's appetite. Later, Jack and Nerd, along with their girlfriends, came to the shop. As soon as Nerd saw Peggy, he made lewd remarks, causing his girlfriend to burst into laughter. Jack, on the other hand, was serious and politely ordered food. Peggy developed a slight crush on him. When her mother was momentarily away, Jack approached Peggy. He invited her to see the outside world and gave her a meeting place for next time. When Peggy asked about his girlfriend, Jack explained that he wasn't sincere towards her and added that Peggy was special, unlike the seductive women outside. Seeing them chat, her mother suspected Jack's intentions. However, when she questioned Peggy, she wouldn't tell the truth. With no other choice, her mother took a tough stance, driving Jack and his gang away. After uttering some harsh words, the gang left. The mother warned Peggy that the outside world was a living hell and urged her not to venture out. On the other side, Jack and Nerd returned to the bar in the downtown, selling the blood they had stolen earlier in the day. Late at night, Peggy saw her chance when her mother had fallen asleep. She left a note saying she was just going out for a walk and got dressed up. She then went to the agreed meeting point where she met Jack. They resumed their awkward conversation, and after a while, Nerd and his girlfriend arrived in a car to pick them up. Peggy remembered her mother's warning and hesitated, but Jack promised her that nothing would happen to her unless she wanted it to. With Jack's assurances, Peggy joined their group, and they all headed towards the downtown together. Along the way, they indulged in various vices and mindless chatter. Peggy recalled her childhood memories. Her mother disliked her sister and was always mean to her, which only caused her sister to become more rebellious. Once, during Peggy's birthday celebration, a poisonous gas attack suddenly broke out in the town. Her mother quickly took both sisters inside and locked the door, watching helplessly as their friends and family succumbed to the poison and died. This event left a deep scar in Peggy's childhood, and her mother would often dream about it. On the other side, the mother suddenly woke up from her sleep, calling out for her daughter. When she received no reply, she rushed outside and found Peggy's note. Furious, she decided to find her daughter immediately. Elsewhere, Peggy arrived in the chaotic downtown area. Although the locals harbored ill intentions towards her, Jack's protection prevented any untoward incidents. They went to the bar, where a special event was taking place. Meanwhile, Peggy's mother also arrived in the downtown area. Since she carried a dagger with her, she faced little resistance. Back in the bar, the owner was unhappy with the quality of the blood from Jack and Nerd's previous delivery, comparing it to dirty water. They had done their best, but clean blood was hard to come by nowadays. It turns out that the owner knew how to revive the dead by injecting them with fresh blood, allowing them to regain some vitality. However, since everyone's blood had been contaminated due to the war, only the elderly could be targeted for their clean blood. Jack and his gang had just delivered some blood, but since the bar owner was unsure of its quality, he didn't pay them right away. Instead, he would pay them based on the results of the bar's special performance. The so-called performance involved reviving the dead and stimulating them with electric prods, causing them to perform a dance of the dead to amuse the audience. Shockingly, this morbid entertainment was legal, as the government had compromised to help people release their stress. It wasn't long before the dead on stage were thoroughly abused and broken. Soon, the bar owner called out the second deceased performer. Just like before, the second performer also began the freak show. After a while, Peggy noticed something off. The performer on stage looked familiar. Upon closer inspection, she realized it was her long-lost sister who fell off the stage at that moment. Peggy asked Jack and his gang to help her save her sister, but Nerd disagreed because they hadn't been paid yet. Jack, however, decided to help Peggy, which led to an argument with Nerd. Carrying her sister, Jack used a gun to threaten the audience to clear a path, eventually succeeding in rescuing her sister. Just as they stepped outside, they encountered Peggy's mother. Knowing there was no way out, Jack decided to take out the bar owner's henchmen. Although Peggy revealed her sister's identity, the bar owner told her that her sister was already dead, and saving her had no meaning. Furthermore, the bar owner had spent a lot of money on these corpses, all obtained through legitimate means. He had bought Peggy's sister and suggested she could ask her mother if she didn't believe him. Upon hearing this, the mother urged Peggy to leave, leaving her sister to the bar owner. Enraged by the bar owner's mockery, the mother tried to kill him, but was knocked down instead. It turned out that the mother had sold the sister to the bar when the mother fell ill and needed money. She explained to Peggy that after their father's death, there was no money left, and her sister was very rebellious. She had no choice but to take this step to survive. It was thanks to the money from selling her sister that she was able to raise Peggy. Upon learning the truth, the bar owner demanded compensation for his losses. Peggy agreed to find a way to repay him. With that, Peggy buried her sister. Afterward, she told Jack that she now had no family left. It turns out she had handed her mother over to the bar owner, meaning her mother would now have to perform the dance of the dead in her sister's place. Peggy fell into depravity and fitted herself into the town culture, feeling that her cold-blooded mother must be punished. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.